The sound of screeching tires echoed through the parking lot as a sleek black sedan came to an abrupt halt, its driver visibly frustrated. A young teenager, wearing a bright blue puffer vest and carrying a bulky backpack, stood frozen just a few feet away, his eyes wide with confusion. He clutched the straps of his backpack tightly, as if they could anchor him in the middle of the chaos. The man behind the wheel slammed his car door open, stepping out with a stormy expression. His face was flushed with anger, his fists clenched as he approached the boy. "What's wrong with you?" the man barked, his voice sharp and cutting through the crisp afternoon air. "Are you blind or just stupid?" The boy flinched but didn't reply. He stood there, motionless, staring down at the pavement as the man's words poured over him like a tidal wave. His lips moved, forming silent words, but nothing came out. The world seemed to close in around him. The honking cars, the murmurs of onlookers, the driver's rising tone, all of it was too much. "You're just standing there, blocking the way. Move already," the man yelled, waving his hands in exasperation. His frustration bubbled over as he gestured wildly toward the car and the road ahead. "Do you even understand what I'm saying?" The boy's breathing quickened. His fingers gripped the straps of his backpack even tighter, his knuckles white from the pressure. His body swayed slightly, rocking back and forth as he tried to process what was happening. It was a small, repetitive motion, barely noticeable unless you were paying close attention. "Hey, I'm talking to you," the man shouted, stepping closer. His presence loomed over the boy, casting a long shadow on the asphalt. At that moment, a voice cut through the tension like a sharp blade. "Is there a problem here?" The man turned to see another figure approaching. An older man, dressed in a plain button-down shirt and dark jeans. His expression was calm but firm, his eyes scanning the scene with quiet authority. It was the boy's father. "Yeah, there's a problem," the driver snapped, turning his attention to the father. "Your kid is just standing in the middle of the parking lot, blocking my way, and he won't even respond. What kind of parenting is that?" The father took a deep breath, his gaze steady as he stepped between the man and his son. "First of all, lower your voice," he said evenly. "There's no need to yell." "Lower my voice?" the driver repeated, incredulous. "Your kid?" "My son," the father interrupted, his tone firm but measured, "is doing his best. He's not ignoring you, he's overwhelmed." "Overwhelmed?" the man scoffed, throwing his hands up. "What's that supposed to mean?" "He's just standing there like he doesn't have a clue." The father turned slightly, glancing back at his son. The boy had stopped rocking but still hadn't spoken. His eyes darted nervously from the pavement to the car to his father's face. "Look at him," the father said softly. "Really look at him. Do you see someone trying to make your day difficult, or do you see someone who's struggling?" The driver hesitated, his bravado faltering for a moment. He looked at the boy more closely, but his impatience quickly resurfaced. "I don't know what you're talking about," he muttered, shaking his head. The father sighed. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the familiar mix of frustration and sadness that came with situations like these. He turned back to the driver, his voice steady but carrying an unmistakable edge. "Let me explain something to you about my son," he began. The man folded his arms across his chest, his expression skeptical. "I don't need an explanation. I just need to get out of here without being blocked by kids who don't know how to act. Please, just listen," the father said, his tone softening. "You don't understand what's happening right now, and I don't blame you for that. But if you take a moment to hear me out, I think you'll see things differently." There was a pause. The driver glanced around, noticing that a few people had stopped to watch the exchange. He shifted uncomfortably, clearly torn between leaving and staying to argue. Finally, he sighed and gestured for the father to continue. The father nodded, appreciating the small concession. "My son is autistic," he began. "He processes the world differently than you or I do. Things that seem simple to us, like moving out of the way when someone honks their horn, can be incredibly overwhelming for him." The driver frowned but didn't interrupt. "Right now," the father continued, "he's not trying to be difficult. He's frozen because he doesn't know how to handle all the noise, the yelling, the pressure. His mind is working overtime, trying to make sense of it all, and it's too much for him. The boy shifted slightly, his eyes flickering up to his father before dropping back to the ground. The father placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. "I know it's frustrating for you," he said, addressing the driver again. "You're in a hurry, and this feels like an inconvenience. But I'm asking you to take a step back and see the bigger picture. My son isn't just a kid standing in your way. He's a person with feelings and struggles you can't see at first glance." The driver opened his mouth to respond but stopped. Something in the father's voice, or perhaps the quiet vulnerability of the boy, gave him pause. He looked between the two of them, his expression softening ever so slightly. "But I didn't know," he said finally, his tone less harsh than before. "I didn't realize." The father nodded. "I know you didn't. That's why I'm telling you now. Everyone has battles they're fighting, even if you can't see them. My son's battle just happens to be a little more visible today." The driver rubbed the back of his neck, clearly uncomfortable but no longer angry. He glanced at the boy again, who was now looking up at him with cautious eyes. The driver hesitated, his hardened demeanor beginning to crack. He glanced at the boy once more, noticing how small and vulnerable he looked despite his teenage frame. The boy's rocking had slowed, but his hands still clung tightly to the straps of his backpack. "I'm sorry if I scared you," the driver said awkwardly, directing his words toward the boy. His voice was quieter now, though it still carried a hint of discomfort. The boy didn't respond. Instead, he looked at his father as if searching for guidance. The father gave him a small nod of encouragement, his hand still resting gently on the boy's shoulder. "It's okay," the father said softly, his words meant for both his son and the driver. He turned back to the man. "I appreciate that you're trying to understand. That's all I can ask." The driver shifted his weight, clearly unsure of how to proceed. He rubbed his hands together nervously, then glanced back at his car. The frustration that had driven him moments earlier seemed to have evaporated, replaced by an uneasy silence. The father decided to break the tension. "I know this might feel awkward," he said, his tone lighter now. "But moments like these are opportunities to learn. And trust me, I've had to learn a lot over the years." The driver raised an eyebrow, curiosity creeping into his expression. "Like what?" he asked, almost in spite of himself. The father smiled faintly, glancing down at his son before answering. "Like patience," he said. "And perspective. When my son was first diagnosed, I didn't understand what autism really meant. I thought it was something he could grow out of, or something I could help him overcome. But I was wrong." The driver tilted his head slightly, intrigued despite his earlier irritation. "Autism isn't something to fix," the father continued. "It's a different way of seeing the world. My son processes things differently, and that's okay. It's not always easy, there are challenges, like moments like this, but it's also opened my eyes to things I never would have noticed otherwise." The boy shifted again, his grip on his backpack loosening just a little. He still hadn't spoken, but his rocking had stopped completely now. He seemed calmer, more grounded, as his father's words filled the space around them. The driver nodded slowly, his arms still crossed but his posture less defensive. "I guess I've never really thought about it that way," he admitted. "I mean, I've heard of autism, but I didn't really know what it was. I just assumed that it's like what you see in movies or on TV," the father interjected gently. "That's a common assumption. But the truth is, autism is a spectrum. Every person on it is different. Some are nonverbal, some have incredible talents, and some, like my son, just need a little extra time and understanding to navigate situations like this." The driver scratched his head, his brow furrowed in thought. "So, what should I have done? I mean, I was just trying to get through the parking lot." The father gave him an understanding smile. "Honestly, a little patience goes a long way. A honk might have been enough to get his attention without scaring him. And if that didn't work, maybe just waiting a moment or asking politely. It's not about doing everything perfectly, it's about showing a little kindness." The driver nodded again, his expression softening further. He glanced at the boy, who was now looking up at him with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Hey kid," the driver said, his voice gentler this time. "I'm sorry for yelling at you. I didn't mean to scare you." The boy didn't reply, but he gave a small nod, his movements slow and deliberate. It was a tiny gesture, but it spoke volumes to the father. "Thank you," the father said, his tone warm. "That means a lot." The driver shifted again, clearly still uncomfortable but making an effort. "I guess I've got a lot to learn," he admitted, his gaze dropping to the ground. "We all do," the father replied. "The important thing is that you're willing to try. That's more than many people are willing to do." The driver glanced at his car, then back at the father and son. "Look, I've got to get going," he said, his voice hesitant. "But, thanks for explaining. And sorry again for yelling. I'll try to remember what you said." The father nodded, his expression sincere. "I appreciate that. Drive safe." As the driver returned to his car and pulled away, the father turned back to his son, who was still standing quietly beside him. "You okay, buddy?" he asked gently. The boy nodded again, this time with a little more confidence. "Good," the father said, giving his shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "You did great." They stood there for a moment, the parking lot now quieter as the commotion died down. The father felt a mixture of emotions, relief, pride, and a lingering sadness that moments like these were still so common. But as he looked at his son, he also felt hope. The boy was stronger than he seemed, navigating a world that didn't always understand him with a quiet resilience. And for the father, that was enough to keep going, one moment at a time. The father and son resumed their walk toward the school entrance, the morning sun casting long shadows across the pavement. The encounter with the angry driver lingered in the air, but the father was determined not to let it define their day. As they approached the school building, the father noticed his son glancing up at him more frequently, as if checking for reassurance. The boy's grip on his backpack had loosened further, and he was walking with a steadier pace now. "Hey, you know what?" the father said, breaking the silence. "I think you handled that really well. That was a tough situation, and you stayed calm. I'm proud of you." The boy didn't reply, but the faintest hint of a smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. It was a small victory, but one that the father cherished. Inside the school, the hallways were bustling with activity. Students darted between classrooms, their voices blending into a lively hum. For the father, the environment was chaotic, but for his son, it was a sensory minefield. "Let's take our time," the father said, noticing his son's hands twitching slightly as they clutched the straps of his backpack again. They navigated the hallway slowly, the father guiding his son with a steady presence. Along the way, a few students paused to greet the boy, their faces lighting up with recognition. "Hey, Liam," a girl called out, waving enthusiastically. Liam gave her a small wave in return, his movements hesitant but deliberate. The father watched the interaction with a mixture of pride and relief. It hadn't always been this way. There had been a time when Liam struggled to connect with his peers, his differences often making him a target for teasing or misunderstanding. But over time, with the support of understanding teachers and patient classmates, he had begun to find his place in the school community. As they reached Liam's classroom, his teacher, Ms. Reynolds, greeted them with a warm smile. "Good morning, Liam." "Good morning, Mr. Carter." "Good morning," the father replied, his tone light. "We had a bit of an eventful morning, but we made it." Ms. Reynolds raised an eyebrow, her expression curious but concerned. "Everything okay?" The father nodded. "Just a little misunderstanding in the parking lot. Nothing we couldn't handle." Liam shifted uncomfortably beside him, his gaze fixed on the floor. Ms. Reynolds noticed and crouched down slightly to meet his eye level. "Hey, Liam," she said gently. "Why don't you come in and get settled? We've got a fun project to work on today." Liam hesitated for a moment, then nodded and stepped into the classroom. The father watched as Ms. Reynolds guided him to his desk, her calm and understanding demeanor putting him at ease. The father lingered in the doorway for a moment, his heart swelling with gratitude. Teachers like Ms. Reynolds were rare, and he knew how much of a difference she had made in Liam's life. "Thank you," he said quietly, catching her attention. She smiled and nodded. "We're all in this together," she replied. As the father left the school, his thoughts returned to the encounter with the driver. He couldn't help but wonder how many other people shared the man's initial misconceptions about autism. How many parents, teachers, and strangers out there didn't know what it meant to truly understand and accept someone like Liam? The rest of the day passed uneventfully, but the father's mind remained preoccupied. That evening, as he and Liam sat at the dinner table, he decided to bring up the topic. "Hey, buddy," he began, keeping his tone casual. "You remember that man from this morning? The one who got upset in the parking lot?" Liam nodded slowly, his fork paused midair. "How did that make you feel?" the father asked, genuinely curious. Liam set his fork down and thought for a moment. "It was loud," he said finally. "And scary." The father's chest tightened at his son's words. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," he said. "Sometimes people don't understand, and they react in ways that aren't kind. But I think we taught him something today. Don't you?" Liam tilted his head, considering this. "He said sorry," he replied. "That's right," the father said, a smile spreading across his face. "And that's a big step. Not everyone is willing to admit when they're wrong. But when they do, it means they're trying to be better." Liam nodded, his expression thoughtful. The father leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. "You know, buddy, you have a way of teaching people things without even trying. Just by being yourself, you help others see the world differently. That's a pretty amazing gift." Liam didn't say anything, but the small smile returned to his face, and the father felt a wave of warmth wash over him. Later that night, after Liam had gone to bed, the father found himself scrolling through social media. He came across a post from a local community group, where someone had shared an anecdote about a driver apologizing to a father and son in a school parking lot. "Today, I witnessed something that reminded me of the power of understanding and kindness," the post began. The father read on, realizing that someone must have observed the interaction that morning. The post described the scene in detail, highlighting the father's calm approach and the driver's eventual apology. "Moments like these remind us that we're all human, and we all have the capacity to grow," the post concluded. The father felt a lump rise in his throat as he read the comments below. Dozens of people had chimed in, sharing their own experiences with autism, their stories of learning to be more patient and understanding, and their appreciation for the reminder that kindness could change lives. He set his phone down, his heart full. The day had started with anger and misunderstanding, but it had ended with connection and hope. The next morning, as he and Liam prepared for another day at school, the father felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew there would be more challenges ahead, more moments of frustration and hurt. But he also knew that each moment was an opportunity to educate, to connect, and to make the world a little brighter for his son and others like him. And as they walked out the door together, the father couldn't help but smile. As the days went on, the morning with the angry driver became a memory, though not one easily forgotten. The incident lingered in the father's mind, not as a source of anger, but as a reminder of how much more work there was to do in fostering understanding for those like Liam. At school, Liam's routine continued. His days were carefully structured, a rhythm that provided him the comfort he needed to navigate a world that often felt overwhelming. While his classmates jumped between activities with ease, Liam took each step deliberately, relying on the schedule taped to his desk and the calm presence of Ms. Reynolds to guide him. For the father, every day brought new challenges, not just as a parent but as an advocate. He had always known that raising a child with autism required more than love. It required education, both for himself and others. And the encounter with the driver had only reinforced that belief. One evening, as the father sat at the kitchen table, papers spread out before him, he began drafting an email to the school. "Dear Principal Monroe," he typed, pausing to choose his words carefully. "I'm writing to propose a school-wide initiative to promote understanding and acceptance of students with autism and other differences." He went on to outline his vision, an assembly featuring speakers who could share their experiences, workshops for teachers to learn new strategies, and activities for students to foster empathy and inclusivity. When he finished, he read the email over twice before hitting send. The next morning, Liam noticed his father seemed more energized than usual. "Are you excited about something?" Liam asked, his tone curious. The father smiled, tousling Liam's hair. "I guess I am," he admitted. "I've got some ideas about how to make your school an even better place. But it's just the beginning." At drop-off that day, Principal Monroe happened to be standing near the entrance, greeting students as they arrived. The father approached her, his email fresh in his mind. "Good morning, Principal Monroe," he said, shaking her hand. "Good morning," she replied warmly. "How are you and Liam doing today?" "We're good, thank you," he said. "I just wanted to follow up on an email I sent last night. It's about starting a program to educate the school community about autism and inclusivity." Principal Monroe's face lit up. "Yes, I saw your email this morning. I think it's a wonderful idea. We're always looking for ways to support our students and foster understanding. Let's set up a meeting to discuss it further." The father felt a surge of hope. "That would be great. Thank you." Over the next few weeks, the father threw himself into the project. He spent hours researching resources, reaching out to local organizations, and brainstorming ways to make the program impactful. He wanted it to be more than a one-time event. He wanted it to spark a lasting change in the school's culture. Meanwhile, Liam began to notice subtle shifts in his day-to-day life at school. Ms. Reynolds started incorporating more stories and discussions about neurodiversity into her lessons, creating a safe space for students to ask questions and share their thoughts. One afternoon, as the class worked on a group project, one of Liam's classmates, a boy named Ethan, leaned over and whispered, "Hey, Liam, I think it's cool how you remember so much about trains. Can you help me with this part?" Liam hesitated, unused to being asked for help, but then he nodded. Together, they worked on the project, and by the end of the day, Ethan was telling anyone who would listen about Liam's incredible knowledge. When Liam told his father about it that evening, his excitement was contagious. "That's amazing, buddy," the father said. "You see? You have so much to share, and people are starting to notice." The father's initiative at the school gained momentum. The first major event was a parent night, where families were invited to learn more about autism and how they could support their children in fostering an inclusive environment. The father was nervous as he stood at the front of the auditorium, preparing to speak. He had always preferred to stay in the background, letting his actions speak for themselves. But this was too important. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice steady. "Thank you for being here tonight. I'm here not just as a parent, but as someone who believes in the power of understanding and kindness. My son, Liam, has autism. And every day, I see both the challenges he faces and the incredible strengths he brings to the world." He shared stories of Liam's journey, from the early days of diagnosis to the small victories they celebrated as a family. He spoke about the importance of patience, empathy, and recognizing the value in every individual. By the time he finished, the room was silent, the audience hanging on his every word. Then, one by one, people began to clap, the applause growing louder until it filled the entire auditorium. As the event wrapped up, several parents approached the father, sharing their own stories and thanking him for his courage. "You've inspired us," one mother said. "I want to teach my kids to be more understanding. Thank you for opening our eyes." For the father, it was a moment of validation, a sign that the ripple effects of their efforts were starting to spread. Back at home, Liam was waiting eagerly to hear about the event. "How was it?" he asked, his eyes bright with curiosity. "It was amazing," the father said, pulling Liam into a hug. "And it's all because of you. You're the reason I'm doing this, buddy. You're making a difference." As the weeks turned into months, the changes at the school became more evident. Students began to approach Liam with genuine curiosity and kindness, eager to learn from him and include him in their activities. Teachers collaborated to create lesson plans that celebrated diversity and encouraged empathy. And the father? He continued to be a tireless advocate, not just for Liam, but for every child who needed someone to believe in them. One day, as he was picking Liam up from school, he noticed a familiar car in the parking lot. It was the same car from that morning months ago, the car of the angry driver. The father's heart skipped a beat as he saw the man step out, his expression unreadable. But this time, there was no shouting, no finger pointing. Instead, the man approached the father cautiously, his hands in his pockets. "Hey," the man said, his voice quieter than the father remembered. "I don't know if you remember me, but..." "I remember," the father said, his tone neutral. The man nodded, looking down at his feet. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry." I've been thinking about that day a lot. And well, I've been trying to be better. I even talked to my kids about it. Told them we all need to be more understanding. The father studied the man for a moment, then extended his hand. "Thank you," he said simply. The man shook his hand, a small but genuine smile on his face. "You and your son, you made me see things differently. I just wanted you to know that." As the man walked away, the father felt a sense of closure. The journey wasn't over, but moments like these reminded him why it was worth it. He turned to Liam, who was watching from the car. "Ready to go, buddy?" Liam nodded, a content smile on his face. And as they drove home, the father couldn't help but feel hopeful. Because in a world that often seemed chaotic and unkind, they were creating their own little ripple of change. One interaction, one conversation, one act of kindness at a time. The changes at Liam's school were only the beginning. The father's determination to create a more inclusive environment began to ripple outward into the broader community. With each small success, he grew more inspired, realizing that their story was capable of touching lives far beyond their immediate circle. One afternoon, while Liam was at school, the father received an unexpected phone call. "Hello, is this Mr. Daniels?" "Yes, speaking," the father replied, unsure of who was calling. "This is Jessica Ramirez, the director of the local community resource center. I recently heard about the program you've started at McLean's College. Your efforts to promote awareness about autism have been truly inspiring. We'd love to invite you to speak at an upcoming community event." The father felt a pang of nerves. Public speaking had never been his strong suit, and the thought of addressing an even larger audience was intimidating. But he quickly reminded himself of his purpose. This wasn't about his comfort, it was about creating change. "I'd be honored," he said, his voice steady. "Thank you for the opportunity." In the weeks leading up to the event, the father prepared meticulously. He gathered stories not just about Liam but also about other families he had met who were navigating similar journeys. He wanted his talk to be more than personal. He wanted it to be a call to action for the entire community. The night of the event arrived, and the Community Resource Center was packed. Families, educators, and local leaders filled the room, all eager to hear the father's message. Liam sat in the front row, his face lighting up when his father stepped onto the stage. "Good evening, everyone," the father began, his voice carrying a quiet confidence. "Thank you for being here tonight. When I started this journey, I never imagined it would lead me to a stage like this. But here we are, and I'm grateful for the chance to share my story." He spoke about the challenges of parenting a child with autism, the moments of frustration, the victories that often went unnoticed by others, and the overwhelming love that made it all worth it. "But this isn't just about my son," he continued. "This is about all of us. It's about how we choose to treat one another, especially those who may see the world differently than we do. We have the power to create a community where everyone feels valued, where differences are celebrated, not judged." The audience was captivated. Some wiped away tears, while others nodded in agreement. By the time the father finished, the room erupted in applause. After the event, people lined up to speak with him. Some shared their own stories, while others asked how they could get involved. A local business owner even offered to sponsor future events, saying, "What you're doing is important. We need more of this in our community." The father left that night feeling a renewed sense of purpose. He realized that the incident with the angry driver had been a catalyst, not just for change at the school, but for something much larger. Back at home, Liam was waiting up for him, despite it being past his usual bedtime. "How did it go?" Liam asked eagerly. "It went great," the father said, sitting beside him. "People are listening, Liam. They want to help make things better." Liam smiled, a soft but genuine expression that spoke volumes. "I'm glad," he said simply. As the weeks turned into months, the father's efforts expanded. He started a community group for parents of children with special needs, offering a space for them to share resources, advice, and support. The group quickly grew, attracting families from all over the area. Liam, too, continued to blossom. With the growing support at school, he began to feel more comfortable stepping out of his shell. One day, Ms. Reynolds announced a talent show, encouraging every student to participate. At first, Liam was hesitant. The idea of standing on stage in front of so many people felt overwhelming. But his father gently encouraged him. "You don't have to do it if you're not ready," he said. "But I think you'd be amazing. You could share something you love, like trains." After much thought, Liam decided to give it a try. He spent weeks preparing a presentation about the history of trains, complete with visual aids and a model he had built himself. The night of the talent show, Liam stood backstage, clutching his notes. His father knelt beside him, offering words of encouragement. "You've got this, buddy," he said. "Just remember, you're sharing something you're passionate about. That's what matters." When Liam's name was called, he stepped onto the stage, his heart pounding. But as he began to speak, something incredible happened. The audience leaned in, captivated by his enthusiasm and depth of knowledge. By the time he finished, they were on their feet, applauding loudly. Liam's face lit up with a mix of pride and relief as he took a small bow. Backstage, his father wrapped him in a hug. "You were amazing," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "I'm so proud of you." In the days that followed, Liam's presentation became the talk of the school. Teachers and students alike praised his courage and knowledge, and even those who hadn't attended asked to see his model. For the father, it was yet another reminder of Liam's potential and of the importance of creating spaces where he could shine. Meanwhile, the father's advocacy efforts continued to grow. He was invited to join a regional task force on disability inclusion, where he worked alongside educators, policymakers, and community leaders to develop initiatives that could benefit families across the state. Through it all, he remained grounded, constantly reminding himself of why he had started this journey. It wasn't about recognition or accolades. It was about Liam and every child who deserved to be seen, heard, and valued. One evening, as the father and Liam sat together on the couch, flipping through a scrapbook of photos and mementos, Liam looked up at his father. "Dad," he said thoughtfully, "do you think people understand me more now?" The father smiled, his heart swelling with pride and love. "I think so, buddy. And it's because of you. You've helped so many people see how amazing you are." Liam nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "I'm glad," he said. As they closed the scrapbook and prepared for bed, the father couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. The road hadn't always been easy, but every step had been worth it. Together, they were building a world where differences were celebrated and kindness reigned. A world where Liam, and others like him, could truly thrive. The following months unfolded like a slow, rewarding sunrise. The seeds of change that Liam's father had planted continued to grow, and their impact became more evident in ways big and small. Liam's life began to transform, and with it, so did the lives of those around him. One of the most significant moments came one crisp autumn morning when Liam's father received an invitation from the city council. They had heard about his advocacy work and wanted him to lead a new initiative aimed at increasing awareness and inclusivity for people with disabilities across the city. At first, the father hesitated. The scale of the project seemed daunting, and he questioned whether he was ready to take on such a responsibility. But when he looked at Liam, who was now thriving in school and forming new friendships, he realized how far they had come and how much further they could go. When he walked into the council meeting to present his vision, the room was filled with influential figures, city leaders, educators, business owners, and even media representatives. Liam's father spoke with the quiet confidence of someone who had lived the challenges he was advocating to address. "We have an opportunity here," he said, his voice steady. "To not just talk about inclusion but to make it a reality. It's not just about policies, it's about changing mindsets, creating opportunities, and fostering a culture where everyone, regardless of their abilities, feels like they belong." The room erupted in applause. The council approved his proposal on the spot, allocating funding for workshops, community events, and training programs for businesses and schools. The initiative, dubbed Open Doors, Open Hearts, quickly gained traction. Local businesses began implementing training to make their spaces more accessible and welcoming. Schools adopted new curriculums that celebrated diversity and taught students how to support their peers with disabilities. For Liam, these changes were life-changing. He no longer felt like an outsider. At school, he joined the science club, where he bonded with other students over their shared love of exploration and problem-solving. His peers began to see him not just as the autistic kid, but as a brilliant, kind, and funny friend who had so much to offer. One day, while Liam was working on a group project, one of his classmates, a boy named Ethan, turned to him and said, "Liam, you're really good at this. How do you know so much about engineering?" Liam's face lit up. "I've been building models and reading about it for years," he said. "It's one of my favorite things." "Well, I think it's awesome," Ethan replied. "You should teach me sometime." For Liam, that moment was monumental. It was the first time he felt truly valued for who he was, not in spite of his differences but because of them. Meanwhile, the father's work continued to expand. He became a sought-after speaker, sharing their story at conferences and events. He also started writing a blog, where he chronicled their journey and offered advice to other parents navigating similar paths. The blog quickly gained a following, with readers from all over the world leaving comments like, "Your story gives me hope," and "Thank you for helping me understand my child better." One day, as he was writing a post about the importance of community, Liam walked into the room holding a flyer. "Dad," he said, "there's a science fair coming up at school. Do you think I should enter?" The father smiled. "Of course you should. What do you want to showcase?" "I was thinking about building a working model of a train system," Liam said, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "I could explain how the tracks are designed and how the engines work." "That sounds incredible," his father said. "Let's do it." Over the next several weeks, their living room became a makeshift workshop. Liam poured his heart into the project, meticulously constructing the model and practicing his presentation. His father was there every step of the way, offering guidance and encouragement but letting Liam take the lead. When the day of the science fair arrived, Liam stood beside his model, his nerves evident but his determination shining through. One by one, students, teachers, and parents stopped by his booth, marveling at his work. "This is amazing," one teacher said. "You really thought of everything." Liam beamed. "Thank you. I just really love trains." By the end of the day, Liam's project had won first place. As he held his ribbon, his father couldn't help but feel a surge of pride, not just for the accomplishment but for the journey that had led them to this moment. Back at home, they celebrated with pizza and Liam's favorite movie. As they sat on the couch, Liam turned to his father and said, "Thanks for believing in me, Dad." The father's eyes filled with tears. "Always, buddy. Always." The success of the science fair was just one of many milestones for Liam. Over time, his confidence grew, and he began to explore new interests and opportunities. He joined a robotics club, where he made friends who shared his passion for building and creating. The father watched in awe as Liam blossomed into a confident, capable young man. He knew there would still be challenges ahead, but he also knew they could face them together. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, Liam turned to his father and said, "Dad, do you think I could be an engineer one day?" The father smiled. "I don't think it, Liam. I know it. You can do anything you set your mind to." As the years went by, Liam's father continued to advocate for change, but his greatest accomplishment was the bond he had built with his son. Together, they had turned a moment of adversity into a movement of hope and possibility. And while the world around them continued to evolve, one thing remained constant: the unbreakable love and determination that had carried them through it all. Liam and his father had faced the world together, and in doing so, they had not only changed their own lives but also inspired countless others to do the same. Because in the end, it wasn't just about creating a better world for Liam. It was about creating a better world for everyone. The story didn't end with Liam and his father settling into a happy routine. As time passed, their lives became a testament to the power of resilience, love, and the enduring belief in the potential of every individual. What had started as a traumatic encounter with a hostile stranger had blossomed into a movement that was rippling far beyond their small community. Liam's father's initiative, Open Doors, Open Hearts, had turned into a regional phenomenon. Towns and cities from across the state began reaching out, eager to replicate the program in their own communities. Liam's father often found himself traveling to speak at town halls, schools, and local businesses, sharing the lessons he had learned as a parent and an advocate. One particularly memorable trip was to a nearby city that was hosting a Disability Awareness Week. The event culminated in a keynote speech delivered by Liam's father in front of a crowd of hundreds. As he spoke, his voice carried the conviction of someone who had walked through fire and come out the other side stronger. "There is so much potential in people like my son," he said, his voice unwavering. "But potential needs opportunity. It needs understanding. It needs us, as a community, to be willing to see beyond the labels and limitations society places on individuals." As he finished his speech, the crowd gave him a standing ovation. Among the audience were parents of children with disabilities, teachers, and even local lawmakers. Many approached him afterward, sharing their own stories and expressing gratitude for his work. One mother, tears in her eyes, said, "You've given me hope for my son. For the first time, I feel like he might have a chance to thrive in this world." Meanwhile, back in their hometown, Liam was making strides of his own. The science fair victory had ignited a passion within him that continued to grow. He spent hours researching engineering topics online and tinkering with various projects in their garage-turned workshop. His latest endeavor was ambitious, designing a solar-powered miniature train system. It was a project inspired by his love for both trains and the environment. Liam's father watched in amazement as his son sketched out blueprints, calculated energy outputs, and experimented with different materials. One evening, as they worked side by side, Liam turned to his father and said, "Do you think I could turn this into something real one day? Like, a train that people could actually use?" His father smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Absolutely, Liam. With your determination and creativity, there's no limit to what you can achieve." The project became a family affair, with Liam's younger sister helping to paint the model and his father assisting with the more technical aspects. When it was finally complete, Liam decided to showcase it at a regional innovation expo. The event attracted inventors, entrepreneurs, and engineers from across the state, making it the perfect platform for Liam to share his ideas. On the day of the expo, Liam stood nervously by his booth, his model train system displayed prominently alongside charts and diagrams explaining its functionality. As people began to stop and ask questions, Liam's confidence grew. He explained his project with clarity and enthusiasm, impressing attendees with both his knowledge and his passion. One of the visitors was a professor from a nearby university who specialized in renewable energy. After listening to Liam's presentation, the professor said, "You've got a brilliant mind, young man. Have you ever thought about studying engineering when you're older?" Liam's eyes lit up. "I'd love to," he said. "I want to design things that make the world better." The professor handed him a business card. "When the time comes, give me a call. We'd be thrilled to have you in our program." The experience was a turning point for Liam. For the first time, he began to see a clear path for his future, a future where his interests and talents could be turned into a career. Back at home, the success of the expo became a point of pride not just for Liam but for the entire community. His story had become a symbol of what was possible when people were given the support and opportunities they needed to thrive. Liam's father, meanwhile, continued to push for systemic change. One of his most significant accomplishments was working with local lawmakers to pass new legislation requiring schools to implement inclusive education programs. The bill, named Liam's Law, aimed to ensure that students with disabilities received the resources and support they needed to succeed. The passage of the bill was celebrated with a community event, where Liam was invited to cut the ribbon on a new resource center for students with disabilities. Standing in front of the crowd, Liam said, "I used to think I didn't belong. But now I know that everyone has a place in this world. We just need to help each other find it." The applause was deafening. As the years went by, the ripples of their journey continued to spread. Liam eventually graduated high school with honors and earned a scholarship to study engineering at the university where the professor from the expo taught. His father, now a well-known advocate, wrote a book about their experiences, which became a bestseller. But through all the accolades and accomplishments, what mattered most to them was the bond they had built as a family. They had faced challenges that could have broken them, but instead, those challenges had brought them closer together. On the day Liam left for college, his father helped him load the last of his boxes into the car. As they stood in the driveway, Liam turned to his father and said, "Thank you, Dad, for everything." His father pulled him into a hug. "You've got this, Liam. I'm so proud of you." As Liam drove away, his father stood in the driveway, watching until the car disappeared from view. He felt a mixture of pride and sadness, but mostly he felt gratitude for the journey they had shared and the bright future that lay ahead. And so, the story of Liam and his father became more than just a tale of overcoming adversity. It became a testament to the power of love, understanding, and the belief that everyone, regardless of their abilities, has something valuable to offer the world. Because in the end, the real victory wasn't just in what they had achieved. It was in the lives they had touched and the hearts they had opened. One step, one conversation, and one act of kindness at a time.